Imagine losing everything. Your home, your family, your hope, all stolen by the one person you trusted most. That was my life. I was betrayed by my own brother, James, and left to survive on the streets. Before I continue, my dear friends, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button, like, and share this video with your loved ones. Your support means the world to me. Thank you so much. But this isn't a story about victimhood. It's about strength, survival, and the journey back home, years later, to confront the truth. You won't believe the choice I made, instead of revenge. Stay tuned. This is my story. I grew up in a village so small, you could walk from one end to the other in less than an hour. We didn't have fancy buildings or big city lights. What we did have was sunshine that felt warmer than anywhere else, and the smell of wood smoke and roasting corn. My name is Mary. Everyone in the village knew me as the girl who loved to climb the old mango tree behind our house. Life there, for a time, was beautiful. Simple. My father, bless his soul, was the center of my world. He was a good man, a hard-working man. He always told me, "Mary, you have a spirit as strong as the roots of the Iroko tree. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." He had a small farm, and we didn't have much, but we had enough. More than enough, actually, because we had him. Then there was my older brother, James. Now, James was always different from me. He was 4 years older, always a little restless, a little too quick to argue. But he was my brother. We shared the same parents, the same memories. I loved him, of course, the way you love the person who used to sneak you extra sweet potatoes when mom wasn't looking. Everything changed the day my father passed away. It happened suddenly. One day he was laughing, telling me one of his endless tales, and the next, he was gone. It felt like someone had snatched the color right out of the world. I was just 19, and James was 23. We were standing there, two young people, facing a future that suddenly looked like a blank, scary page. That's when I realized the sunshine I'd grown up with had suddenly disappeared, and a deep, heavy shadow had taken its place. It was a shadow cast not by grief, but by something much, and that shadow was James. The dust hadn't even settled on my father's grave before things started to go wrong. I was still walking around in a daze, barely eating, just trying to process the sheer silence in our house. That silence was soon replaced by James's loud, demanding voice. My father had left a will, simple but clear. Everything, the house, the small plot of land, the little savings he had, was to be divided equally between James and me. Fair, right, that's what I thought. But James had other ideas. One evening, about a month after the burial, he called me into the sitting room. He was sitting in my father's old armchair, a chair I'd never seen him sit in before, and he had a look on his face that was completely foreign to me. It wasn't sadness. It was calculation. "Mary," he started, his voice flat. "Things are going to change. I'm the man now. I'm taking over." I was confused. "James," we agreed. "We'll work the land together. Dad wanted us to share." He actually scoffed. He actually laughed at me. "Share? With you? You're just a girl, Mary. What do you know about farming, or managing money? I have expenses. I have plans." He tapped a document on the table. It wasn't the original will. "I've had a lawyer look at this. The way the village laws are, well, the man of the house gets the majority. It was all a lie. I knew it, but I was too shocked to fight back. Over the next few weeks, the betrayal unfolded like a terrible stage play. He sold off my father's tools, then the small herd of goats, and finally, he served me with a paper, a fake, I'm sure, saying I had to vacate the property. My home. The place where I was born. The day he looked me in the eye and said, "You're nothing without him, Mary. Go on, get out," that's the day I realized my brother had not only stolen my inheritance, he had stolen my family. He had stripped me bare, leaving me with no home, no support, and honestly, no hope. I was utterly alone. I remember that final night like it was yesterday. The air was thick and heavy, smelling of dust and the faint perfume of night-blooming jasmine, a smell that now, even years later, still makes my stomach clench. James had given me 3 days to pack and leave. 3 days to abandon the only life I had ever known. But on the third night, I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't stand the thought of James watching me walk out in the morning light, gloating, knowing he had won. I decided I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. I would leave under the cover of darkness. I didn't have much to pack. Everything of value was either sold or locked away by James. I grabbed a small, worn cloth bag. Inside, I put the only things that truly mattered. The locket my mother had given me, a small, faded photograph of my parents, and a handful of dried cassava root, just enough to last maybe 2 days. That was it. Everything else, the memories of laughter, the smell of my father's pipe, the sound of the evening prayer, I had to carry in my heart. Around midnight, when the village was swallowed by silence and the only sound was the chirping of crickets, I slipped out of the house. I was wearing my oldest dress and my flattest sandals. My heart hammered against my ribs so loudly I was sure it would wake James. I didn't look back at the house. I couldn't. If I had, I would have broken down right there, and I knew I couldn't afford a single tear. Tears are a luxury when you're fighting for your survival. My destination. The city. I knew it was far, a grueling journey, mostly on foot, maybe hitching a ride on an overloaded lorry if I was lucky. But in my village, James's control was absolute. The city, scary as it was, represented the only place he couldn't reach me, the only place I could truly disappear and start over. As I walked down the dark, uneven path leading out of the village, the weight of my loss hit me all at once. I wasn't just losing a house, I was losing my foundation, my security, my identity. I was running away, utterly alone, heading toward a world I knew nothing about. I gripped the little cloth bag tighter. I had to be strong. I was Mary, and my father said I had the spirit of the Iroko tree. And the Iroko tree doesn't break. The journey was brutal. It took 4 days to get far enough away that I felt safe. I walked during the coolest hours of the night and early morning, and I hid in the shade of large trees during the day, rationing my cassava. Hunger became a dull, constant ache in my stomach. Danger felt like a shadow walking just 2 steps behind me. On the third day, I ran out of food and water. I hadn't seen a stream or a friendly face in hours. I was walking along the dusty main road, the sun beating down mercilessly, and I thought, this is it. I can't go any further. My legs felt like lead, and my head was throbbing. Just then, I heard the loud, sputtering sound of an old lorry struggling up the road. I forced myself to stand up and wave weakly. The lorry was piled high with sacks of grain, and the driver, a cheerful-looking woman with a bright headscarf named Grace, stopped. She looked down at me, her eyes full of immediate concern. "Child, what are you doing out here? You look like you're about to fall over." I couldn't even speak. I just pointed down the road, toward the city. Grace didn't ask a single question about where I came from or why I was alone. She simply said, "Get up here. You ride with me." She gave me a bottle of cool water and half a loaf of bread. That simple act of generosity, that moment of pure, unasked for kindness from a complete stranger, broke through my walls. I sat in the passenger seat, eating slowly, and for the first time since my father died, I cried. Not tears of pain, but tears of relief. Grace's lorry carried me the rest of the way. She dropped me off just on the outskirts of the sprawling, chaotic city, gave me a small amount of cash, just enough for a day's meal, and a serious warning. "The city is harsh, Mary. Trust your instincts. And remember that the sun always rises, even after the longest night." Her kindness gave me the physical energy and the mental courage I needed to face the towering concrete and endless noise of the city. I was still scared, but now, I wasn't completely empty. I slumped down beneath a huge acacia tree. I felt defeated. I closed my eyes, just for a second, to try and gather the strength to move. Stepping off Grace's lorry and into the city was like jumping into a fast-moving river. Everything was noise, speed, and endless people rushing past, none of them noticing the scared, small-town girl standing frozen on the sidewalk. I had never seen anything like it. My village was quiet. There were horns blaring, music pounding, merchants shouting, and the constant roar of traffic. The buildings were so tall they seemed to touch the sky, and they cast long, cold shadows even at midday. This wasn't the welcoming, warm environment I was used to. This was a jungle, and I was instantly aware I was the weakest thing in it. I spent the first night sleeping in a public market stall that was locked up after sunset. It smelled of rotten fruit and fish, but it was dry, and the cold concrete offered some cover. I clutched my little bag and the tiny bit of money Grace had given me. I didn't sleep much. Every noise sounded like danger. Survival became my only job. The small amount of money I had lasted exactly one day, used to buy a couple of cheap street buns and a bottle of water. After that, I was truly on my own. I tried to find work. I approached shopkeepers, construction sites, and market women. But who hires a dusty, uneducated girl with no references and no place to sleep? Most people shooed me away with a wave of the hand. A few were openly suspicious, telling me to get lost before they called the authorities. I learned very quickly how to look invisible. I learned how to stand by the back of a restaurant and wait for them to throw out leftover food, the bruised mangoes, the stale bread. I learned to drink from public taps, even though the water made my stomach ache. Hunger became my shadow, walking with me every minute of every day. The city had a million faces, but none of them were friendly. Every step was a calculation. Is this street safe? Is that person watching me? Can I sit here without getting moved along? I was exhausted, filthy, and shrinking. The Iroko spirit my father spoke of felt like it was being slowly chipped away, piece by piece, by the unforgiving concrete jungle. I was just trying to make it to the next sunrise. The weeks bled into a single, painful memory of cold nights and empty stomachs. I started meeting other people on the streets, other lost souls. Some were kind, sharing a stale piece of bread or a tip about a safe corner. Others were predators, and I learned to avoid them like fire. One day, I hit rock bottom. I had been without food for almost 2 days. I was sitting on the curb in a busy area, hiding my head in my arms, trying to ignore the dizziness and the grinding emptiness inside me. Suddenly, a big, rough-looking man stopped in front of me. He kicked the ground near my feet. "Hey, you, get up," he barked. I looked up, terrified. He was a street enforcer, someone who claimed ownership of that specific sidewalk. "This spot is for the old woman who sells bananas," he said, looming over me. "Move, now." I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't obey. I was too weak. I stumbled, and my small cloth bag, the one with the photo of my parents, slipped from my hand. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Look at you. Just a weak little beggar." He deliberately kicked my bag, sending the few small, worthless items scattering onto the dirty pavement. The photograph landed face up, right in a puddle of muddy water. I stared at the ruined picture of my parents, my last tangible link to my old life, to the love and safety I had lost. It was smeared and waterlogged, just like my dreams. At that moment, something snapped. It wasn't anger. It was total, absolute despair. I didn't just feel hungry, I felt defeated. I felt worthless. I picked up the ruined photo, my hands shaking. I thought of James, comfortable in our father's house. I thought of my father's words about the Iroko tree. And for the first time, I thought, maybe James was right. Maybe I am nothing. I just sat there, surrounded by the noise of the city, and let the tears finally fall, soaking the dirt beneath me. I had run out of strength, run out of fight, and run out of hope. I was still sitting there, on the dirty curb, holding the ruined photograph, completely oblivious to the chaos around me. The street enforcer had wandered off, satisfied that he'd taught the young beggar a lesson. I didn't care. I felt completely empty, like a broken vessel. Just when the darkness felt total, I sensed a presence beside me. I didn't look up, expecting another harsh word or a demand to move. But the voice that spoke was soft and low, completely different from the usual rough tones of the street. "Hello there," the voice said gently. "Are you all right?" I finally lifted my head. Standing over me wasn't a street hustler or an angry shopkeeper. It was a man, probably in his early 40s, dressed in neat but simple clothes. He had a kind face, serious eyes, and a quiet, unassuming demeanor. His name, I would soon learn, was Michael. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, still clutching the muddy picture. Michael didn't pressure me. He just crouched down slowly, giving me space, and looked at me with genuine compassion. "You look very lost," he said, his voice calm. "And very hungry. What's your name?" "Mary," I whispered, the sound scratchy in my throat. He noticed my shaking hands and the way I was instinctively hiding my tattered bag. He didn't ask about my family or my past. He just looked at the desperation etched on my face. "Mary," he said, standing up. "I don't know what brought you here or why you're alone. But I can see you need help. I'm not going to hurt you or ask you for anything. I just want to offer you a meal." A meal. The word sounded like a forgotten melody. I hesitated. On the streets, kindness often came with a price. I was used to being chased away, not invited. Michael seemed to sense my fear. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, clean handkerchief, handing it to me. "I'm heading to the small restaurant just around the corner," he explained. "You can come with me, or you can stay here. But if you come, you eat, and then we talk." No pressure. The simple dignity of his offer, the fact that he was treating me like a person and not just a piece of street refuse, was shocking. My hunger was a fierce, demanding master, and his kindness was too rare to refuse. Gathering every ounce of remaining strength, I slowly stood up. I looked him in the eye, trying to assess the danger. All I saw was sincerity. "Okay," I croaked. "Thank you." That was the moment. A kind stranger named Michael appeared, and the long, cold fight for survival finally, dramatically changed course. The restaurant Michael led me to was small, clean, and smelled wonderfully of spices and hot oil. It was the best smell in the world. He didn't take me to a fancy table. He just led me to a quiet corner and ordered a huge plate of rice and beans, and a cool drink. He didn't speak while I ate. And let me tell you, I ate like I hadn't seen food in a year, which was almost true. It felt like my body was thanking me with every bite. Michael just watched me quietly, occasionally signaling the waiter for more water. When the plate was finally empty, and the sharp edge of hunger had finally dulled, I leaned back, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spread through me. It was the warmth of food, but also the warmth of safety. "Thank you, Michael," I said, my voice much stronger now. He smiled softly. "You're welcome, Mary. Now, let's talk. I run a small carpentry workshop just a few blocks from here. I've seen you around. I've watched you struggling. Tell me, truly, what is a young woman like you doing sleeping on the streets?" I took a deep breath. Telling the story of James felt like ripping a fresh wound open. But Michael's steady gaze encouraged me. I started at the beginning. My father's death, the will, James's betrayal, and my desperate flight in the night. I left out nothing. I spoke about the fear, the hunger, and the moment of despair I had just experienced. Michael listened to the whole, terrible tale without interrupting. He didn't pity me, which I appreciated, he just listened with an understanding heart. When I finished, there was a long silence. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He simply looked me straight in the eye and said, "That is a heavy burden for a young person to carry, Mary. Your brother committed a grave injustice. But listen to me. That injustice does not define you. Your fight to survive, to get here on your own, that is your true strength." He tapped the table. "I can't replace your family, and I can't get your land back overnight. But I can offer you a fresh start. If you're willing to work hard and follow simple rules, I can give you a job, a small place to sleep in the back of my shop, and 3 meals a day. It won't be easy, but it will be safe." I couldn't believe my ears. It felt like the universe, after months of punching me down, had finally decided to give me a lift. Had finally This was more than just kindness, it was a lifeline. Michael was true to his word. That very night, he took me back to his workshop. It wasn't glamorous. It was a big, open space filled with the wonderful, honest smell of sawdust and freshly cut wood. It was orderly and clean, and it felt like the safest place in the world. He showed me a small, curtained-off corner at the back, next to a stack of wood planks. "This is yours," he said. "It has a thick blanket and a pillow. The bathroom is through that door. You can wash your clothes in that bucket. It wasn't a room, it was a space. But after months of sleeping on cold, dirty concrete, it felt like a palace. I had a roof, a floor, and most importantly, a door that locked. I slept deeply and soundly for the first time in ages. The next morning, the new life began. Michael's carpentry business was small but busy. He mostly made custom furniture and repaired broken pieces for local businesses. He had one elderly assistant, an even-tempered man named David, who had been working with Michael for years. My job was simple at first: cleaning the workshop, organizing the tools, sanding the rough edges of the wood, and running errands. It was hard, physical labor, but I embraced it. I worked from sunrise to sunset, fueled by Michael's steady provision of food and the pure, desperate need to prove my worth. Michael was a kind but firm boss. He expected dedication and honesty. He paid me a tiny, symbolic wage, which he insisted I save. "You need to build a nest egg, Mary," he'd say. Safety means having something to fall back on. I didn't just clean, though. I watched Michael and David measure planks, handle the saws, and join pieces of wood with incredible precision. I was mesmerized by how they took a rough, shapeless log and transformed it into something useful and beautiful. I started asking questions. "Michael, why do you use that type of screw here instead of a nail?" "David, what is the difference between a plane and a chisel?" They never shut me down. They saw my interest and encouraged it. Michael started showing me how to handle the lighter tools, teaching me the language of the trade, the measurements, the materials, the patience. Slowly, Mary, the runaway village girl, started to become Mary, the apprentice carpenter. Michael was more than just an employer, he was a mentor. He wasn't just teaching me about wood, he was teaching me about life again. He taught me the importance of being meticulous. He'd say, "In carpentry, Mary, a tiny mistake in measurement, maybe just a millimeter, means the whole piece is wasted. Measure twice, cut once." The same goes for life decisions. Think carefully before you act. He also taught me about trust. Because of James, my walls were up high. I was suspicious of everyone. When Michael would send me to the market with a large sum of money to buy materials, I would panic. I always rushed back, terrified I would lose the cash. One afternoon, I returned from the lumberyard. I was stressed, but I brought back the correct planks and the change. I placed the money on his desk. Michael looked at me kindly. "Mary, I gave you that money because I trust you. I watched how you worked on the streets, how you survived. You have integrity. You don't need to rush back to prove it to me. I already know who you are." It was such a simple statement, but it hit me hard. James had stripped me of my trust in others and, in turn, my trust in myself. Michael was quietly, patiently rebuilding it. Under his guidance, my confidence grew. After 6 months, I wasn't just sweeping the floor, I was assembling simple joints, helping to finish small chairs, and managing the inventory. My hands, which had once been scarred and weak from the streets, were now strong, calloused, and skilled. I was saving the small wages Michael gave me. It wasn't much, but every coin represented my own hard work, my own independence. It was security I had earned, not inherited. I finally had control over my life again, thanks to the quiet man who took a chance on a desperate stranger. 4 years passed in that workshop. 4 years of the scent of pine and cedar, the rhythmic sound of sawing, and the steady, quiet presence of Michael and David. I was no longer the frightened, desperate girl who stumbled off the streets. I was now Mary, the junior carpenter. My skills had progressed far beyond simple sanding. I could read Michael's complex blueprints, handle the heavy power tools with confidence, and, most importantly, I could design and build furniture myself. I was proud of my work. The things I created were sturdy, functional, and beautiful. My hands, once symbols of my powerlessness, were now tools of creation and independence. Michael was an incredible teacher. He saw that I was also good with numbers and organizing, so he taught me the business side. I learned how to track inventory, calculate costs, and negotiate prices with suppliers. I was effectively his business manager and his lead apprentice. I didn't waste a single penny. My small savings grew steadily, tucked away safely in a bank account Michael helped me open. Every deposit was a small victory against James's betrayal. I thought of it as building my own fortress, coin by coin. I also grew in confidence and in spirit. The city was no longer a concrete jungle, but a place of opportunity. I had built a small, quiet community around the workshop. David treated me like a daughter. The local food stall owner knew my order by heart. I was safe, I was respected, and I was useful. But even in the middle of a good day, when the sun streamed through the workshop windows, the memory of my home village, and the injustice that drove me out, never truly left me. I never contacted James. I never contacted anyone from the village. I knew that if I was going to survive, I had to cut all ties. But the wound, while hidden, was still there. It had scarred over, but it was deep. I was growing stronger, but I wasn't finished with my past. The older I got, the more successful the business became, the more one idea started to take root in my mind. It was a quiet obsession. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't spend my days wishing James ill or dreaming of violence. My obsession was simply this: I had to know the truth. I had to know what really happened after I left. Was James still living comfortably in the house he stole? Was he using the land? Was my father's memory being honored, or had James run everything into the ground with his greed? I started reading newspapers from my home region, which Michael helped me find. I would pore over the small, local articles, searching for any familiar names or clues about the village. It was a long shot, but I was determined. I kept this search a secret. Michael knew my past, but he thought I had moved on completely. He often spoke about expanding the business in the city, maybe opening a second shop. I smiled and agreed, but my eyes were constantly drawn toward the map tacked up on the workshop wall, a map that showed the long, dusty road leading back to my village. The final push came from a realization about my father's farm. He loved that land. It was his whole life. If James was neglecting it, letting it wither, that would be the ultimate desecration of my father's memory. It wasn't just about the money or the house, it was about honoring the legacy of the man who raised me. I realized I couldn't move forward in peace until I looked back one last time. I needed closure, and I needed to expose James's lie. My goal wasn't to destroy him. It was to use my new strength and skills to finally right the monumental wrong he had committed. It was time for Mary, the carpenter, to become Mary, the heroine. The time had come. After nearly 5 years, I knew I had the skills, the confidence, and the savings I needed. I couldn't put it off any longer. Telling Michael was the hardest part. I sat him down one evening, long after David had gone home, the scent of wood shavings thick in the air. I laid out my secret plan. "Michael," I began, showing him my bank book, which now held a respectable, life-changing sum. "You gave me everything. You taught me a trade and helped me become someone strong. Now I have to use that strength to close the door on my past." I told him I was going back. I explained that I wasn't going for revenge, but for validation and justice. I needed to see what James had done and, if possible, buy back the land or at least expose the truth of his betrayal to the village elders. Michael listened, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. I expected him to tell me it was foolish, dangerous, or a waste of my newfound life. But he didn't. "Mary," he said, his eyes serious, "your father's legacy is part of your soul. If you don't settle this, you will always carry this emptiness." He paused and smiled sadly. "You came to me as a broken bird, and now you are an eagle ready to fly. I won't clip your wings." He then did something completely unexpected. He went to his safe and pulled out a large, sealed envelope. "I've been holding onto this for you," he explained. "It's the money I should have paid you when you were still learning, before I started giving you a real wage. It's a bonus. Use it, not to fight, but to build." He also gave me the single most important tool I would take with me, the original copy of my father's will, which he had helped me secure through a private contact years ago, just in case. It was my key piece of evidence. We embraced. It was a tearful farewell, full of gratitude and love. I promised I would return, whatever the outcome. I left Michael with a heavy heart but a clear purpose. I was going back to the village, not as the weak, desperate girl who ran away, but as Mary, the resourceful carpenter with a mission. The journey back was a complete contrast to my flight 5 years earlier. I didn't hide in lorries or walk through the night in fear. I traveled with dignity, taking a proper bus to the regional town, and then hiring a reliable taxi for the final, dusty stretch to the village gates. As the old taxi rattled along the familiar dirt road, my heart pounded. I told the driver to drop me off at the outskirts. I wanted to enter on my own terms, quietly, assessing the situation before anyone knew I was there. Stepping out of the taxi, the first thing that hit me was the smell, the familiar mix of wood smoke, livestock, and fresh earth. It felt like coming home and stepping into a time machine all at once. The landscape hadn't changed, but I had. I pulled my scarf higher over my face and walked. The first signs of change were subtle. The roads seemed rougher, the common market area a bit quieter. But the main shock came when I reached the familiar part of the village. My father's land was supposed to be the jewel of the area, a testament to his hard work. But what I saw was neglect. The fences were falling down, the mango trees were overgrown and choked by weeds, and the small field where we grew corn was patchy and withered. The site of the house was even worse. The walls looked dull and chipped, and the roof had noticeable gaps. The entire compound seemed to sag with apathy. It wasn't the proud, well-kept home James had stolen, it looked like a ruin. It became instantly clear, James hadn't thrived. He had plundered the inheritance and let the rest decay. My quiet obsession was now confirmed by this heartbreaking reality. The anger, which I had kept buried for years, began to simmer. I knew then that my return wasn't just about exposing a liar, it was about saving the last bit of my father's hard work from complete ruin. I couldn't just walk into the village center. News travels fast in a small community, and I didn't want James alerted to my presence until I had all the facts. I needed a safe, temporary place to observe and plan. I remembered an old, abandoned shed far behind the fields, on the edge of the forest. It was used years ago for storing tools for a farm that had been sold off. It was hidden from view and rarely visited. I walked the extra distance, pushing through thorny bushes and tall grass until I found it. The shed was dilapidated, dusty, and infested with spiders, but it was structurally sound and dry. Using the skills Michael had taught me, I immediately set about making it habitable. I bought supplies discreetly from a merchant in the nearest town: a thick tarp, a few basic cooking implements, candles, and some sturdy rope. Over the next 2 days, I turned the shed into a secure, functional base. I hung the tarp for privacy, swept out the years of dirt, and patched the gaps in the walls. I even created a small, camouflaged fire pit for cooking. This little shed became my operational headquarters. From here, I began my investigation. My first task was to learn about James. I made careful, covert trips into the village during the busy hours, dressed in plain clothes and with my scarf covering most of my face. I hung around the main well and the market, listening to snippets of conversation. It didn't take long to piece together the picture of James's life. The story was tragic, but not surprising. James had quickly sold off my father's most valuable remaining assets and blown the money on a reckless lifestyle, gambling, drinking, and trying to impress people who weren't truly his friends. He had promised to modernize the farm, but he lacked the skill and the discipline. He had simply neglected the fields. The community, seeing his self-destructive path, had grown distant and disapproving. James was living in the house, yes, but he was isolated, bitter, and likely broke. The prosperity he had stolen had turned to ash in his hands. My goal wasn't just to prove James was a bad manager. I needed concrete evidence of the original betrayal, the fraudulent transfer of my father's assets. The first place I went was the local government office, disguised as a research assistant for a city project. I was asking about historical land ownership records. This was the moment Michael's training in negotiation and organization proved invaluable. I wasn't the frightened girl who accepted a lie. I was a focused young woman asking educated questions. I managed to view the official records. What I found confirmed my suspicions. The property transfer papers, which supposedly showed James gaining full ownership after my father's death, were poorly forged. The signature wasn't convincing, and crucial paperwork, like the proper witness attestations, was missing. Crucially, I discovered that James had only transferred ownership of the house and the main field. A small, separate plot of land, a tiny, unused grove of sacred trees on the far corner of the property, was still officially registered in my father's name, because James had been careless enough to overlook it. It was a loophole. That meant, technically, I still had a legitimate claim to some of my father's inheritance. The final piece of evidence was the most powerful: the original, genuine copy of my father's will that Michael had secured. I carefully copied the relevant sections of the will and the fraudulent transfer documents. I now had 3 things: proof of James's reckless mismanagement of the farm, evidence of the forged documents used to steal the house, a legal loophole, the sacred grove, that proved my father's estate was still legally active and partially mine. I was ready. I had my weapons. Not fists or anger, but facts and documents. The time for hiding was over. It was time for the confrontation. I chose my moment carefully. It was midday, and James was sitting on the porch of the dilapidated house, looking worn out and bitter, cleaning a rusty farm tool, a job he probably should have hired someone else to do, but couldn't afford. I walked up the overgrown path. I didn't announce myself. I just stood at the edge of the porch, letting the shadow of my presence fall over him. James looked up, annoyed at the interruption. His expression hardened, ready to curse out a beggar or a debt collector. Then, his eyes widened. The tool dropped from his hand and clattered onto the porch boards. "Mary," he breathed, the name coming out as a strained whisper. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, and in a way, he had. He hadn't seen the weak girl who ran away. He saw a grown woman, dressed neatly, standing straight and radiating an unfamiliar, quiet power. "Hello, James," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the churning nerves inside me. He recovered quickly, the old arrogance flickering back. "What are you doing here? Did you finally crawl back after all these years? Get off my property." "Your property?" I lifted an eyebrow, a gesture Michael had taught me during difficult negotiations. "We need to talk about that, James. About what you claimed was yours, and what you took from me." He stood up, towering over me, trying to use his size to intimidate me. I said, "Get out. I don't want trouble, Mary. You gave up your rights when you ran away." "I didn't run away, James. I was chased away by your greed and your lies," I countered, taking a step closer. "Look at this place. You stole our father's legacy, and look what you've done to it. It's ruined. You were supposed to be the man of the house, James. You broke our family and you broke his memory." His face flushed with shame and anger. "You don't know anything. I was owed more. He always favored you." "Favored me." I pulled out the copied documents, the genuine will and the forged transfer papers, from the envelope Michael had given me. "You didn't take what you were owed, James. You took everything using a lie. Here is the real will. And here is your forgery." I held them out for him to see. He tried to snatch them, but I pulled them back sharply. "Don't touch them. These are going straight to the village assembly. And the whole village will know the truth about what you did the moment our father closed his eyes." James froze. The color drained from his face. He knew the rules of the village. Reputation and honesty meant everything. He had been isolated by his actions, but being publicly exposed for fraud, that would destroy him entirely. The silence between us was heavy, filled with 5 years of pain and betrayal. I had won the first battle, not with anger, but with truth. The next morning, the village was buzzing. James, in a panic, had told a few people I was back and trying to cause trouble. But the story of my sudden appearance and my accusation of fraud had spread like wildfire. I went straight to the house of Elder Peter, the most respected man in the community and the custodian of records. I requested a formal village assembly, a traditional gathering where disputes are heard and judged by the community leaders. The assembly was held under the great Iroko tree near the market, the same kind of tree my father always talked about. The entire community was there, curious and tense. James stood opposite me, looking disheveled and defensive, his eyes darting nervously. I approached the elders. I didn't scream or accuse. I spoke calmly, clearly, in the conversational, honest tone I had prepared. I laid out the whole story. The equal division in the will, James's immediate deceit, my flight, and his utter destruction of the farm. Finally, I presented the evidence. The genuine will, proving my equal share. The forged documents, exposing his crime. The state of the land, visible proof of his mismanagement. Elder Peter and the other leaders examined the documents carefully. They consulted the village's own records. After a long, solemn silence, Elder Peter looked up, his face grim. "James," he spoke, his voice booming across the silent crowd. "The evidence is clear. The signature on the transfer document is not that of your father, and the necessary witnesses are not present. You have committed a fraud against your own sister and against the laws of this community. You have stolen your sister's inheritance and dishonored your father's memory." James tried to protest, to claim I was lying, but his voice cracked, and no one would listen. His own friends wouldn't even meet his gaze. The judgment was swift and absolute. James had to immediately vacate the house and the main property. He was to have no claim on the assets he had ruined, and he was publicly disgraced in front of the community. Justice had been served. The day after the assembly, James left. He didn't say goodbye, and he didn't apologize. He simply gathered the few belongings he had left, ignored the sullen glares of the villagers, and walked away down the same dusty road I had taken 5 years earlier. He was now the one with nothing, banished from his home. The house was mine again. The land was mine again. The elders formally transferred the deeds, confirming my full ownership of the estate, or what was left of it. I had won, but standing inside the house felt strange. It wasn't the happy home of my childhood. It was dark, smelled of neglect and stale air, and everything felt wrong. The walls seemed to echo with the ghosts of arguments and greed. My victory felt hollow. I sat down in the center of the empty sitting room. I had achieved my goal. Justice was served, the truth was out, and I had regained what was mine. But I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, profound sadness. The property was a disaster. The fields were barren, the fences were broken, and the house needed extensive repairs. James hadn't just stolen the assets, he had saddled me with a giant, broken project. My savings, which I had planned to use for expansion in the city, would barely cover the immediate repairs here. More than the physical damage, the emotional damage was staggering. I looked at the ruin James had made of our father's legacy and saw the ruin he had made of his own life. His betrayal had cost me 5 years of pain and struggle, but his greed had cost him his entire future. I realized the feeling wasn't triumph, it was relief mixed with a lingering ache. I had proven my father's words right, I had the spirit of the Iroko tree. But what do you do once you've survived the storm and are left standing in a field of broken branches? I needed to decide what to do with this empty victory and this broken home. The whole village expected me to sell. Everyone assumed I would immediately liquidate the property, take the cash, and return to my successful life in the city. The elders even told me they would help me find a buyer quickly. I spent a week walking the land, measuring the damage, and calculating the costs. I called Michael and updated him. He confirmed what I already suspected. Fixing the farm would be a massive, draining undertaking, financially and emotionally. He gently encouraged me to sell and come back to the workshop, where a successful life was waiting. But every time I walked past the sacred grove that James had overlooked, the plot still legally tied to my father's name, I remembered something Michael taught me: use your skills to build, not to fight. I looked at the house. This was the place where my mother taught me to read, where my father told me stories under the moonlight. It was ruined, yes, but it was mine. It was the last link to my family. Selling it would be giving up the last battle. Then I thought of James. Where was he? Wandering the streets, just as I had been 5 years ago, but without the innocence and strength I had possessed. He was a broken man, brought down by his own hand. I made my decision. It was radical. It wasn't about revenge. It was about healing and courage. I called the village elders back to the Iroko tree. I told them I wasn't selling. I am going to rebuild this farm, I announced. I will restore my father's land and make it thrive again. Then came the second, harder part of my choice. And when I start the rebuilding, I continued, looking around at the surprised faces, I want to bring James back. I want to offer him a place to stay, and a job as a paid laborer on the farm he once stole. A collective gasp went through the crowd. I chose forgiveness. I realized that the only way to truly overcome his betrayal wasn't to punish him further, but to demonstrate a strength and compassion he could never understand. I wouldn't give him the inheritance, but I would offer him the one thing he couldn't find anywhere else: a second chance and a path toward redemption. Finding James wasn't difficult. He had wandered to the outskirts of the nearest town, sleeping rough and working odd, back-breaking day jobs for pennies. He was a shell of the arrogant young man who had stolen my future. I didn't go myself. I knew that face to face, his pride might make him reject the offer outright. Instead, I asked Elder Peter, who was now fully supportive of my decision, to act as my messenger. Peter found James one evening, resting outside a dusty store. He delivered my message, not as a command, but as a plain statement of fact. Your sister, Mary, has regained control of the farm. She knows what you did, James. The community knows. But she has chosen a path of forgiveness. She is offering you a job as a paid laborer on the land, and a small, private place to sleep in the renovated outbuilding. This is not a gift or an inheritance. It is a job. You must work hard, respect her rules, and be sober. If you accept, you have a chance to rebuild your life. If you refuse, you are truly on your own. James's reaction was reportedly one of total disbelief, followed by a surge of furious pride. Mary, the girl I threw out, is now offering me charity. He initially scoffed and turned his back on Elder Peter. But the streets had worn him down. The hunger was real. The shame was a constant companion. He spent a night thinking about it, shivering in the cold, comparing his life to the security and purpose Mary was offering. It wasn't charity. It was a way back into a dignified life, a chance to work the soil he grew up on, and a way to quietly atone. 2 days later, James walked into the village. He didn't come to the house. He went straight to Elder Peter and, with a bowed head, accepted the terms. It was the deepest act of surrender he could make. When Michael had taught me about negotiating, he said, always leave the other person a dignified way to say yes. That's what I did. I didn't ask for an apology, I asked for effort. The first few weeks of working together were tense, awkward, and silent. I had moved into the house and started the enormous job of cleaning and fixing the structure. James worked on the land. We rarely spoke, only communicating through basic, work-related instructions. James, these weeds need to be cleared before the rain. Yes, Mary. The fence needs new posts here. I know. He was sullen, resentful, and his pride was clearly wounded. But he was also an incredibly hard worker. He knew the land, and he knew farming. He worked tirelessly, perhaps punishing himself, perhaps simply grateful for the solid ground beneath his feet and the 3 square meals a day. For me, it was tough. Every time I looked at him, I saw the face of the boy who shattered my life. It took all my mental discipline to remember my choice. Forgiveness is an action, not a feeling. I had to treat him only as an employee, fairly, strictly, and without emotional involvement. I used my savings from the city to buy quality tools, new seed, and materials. I put my carpentry skills to use, rebuilding the barn and the chicken coop from the ground up, measuring and cutting with the precision Michael had drilled into me. The whole village watched, amazed at the speed and efficiency with which Mary, the returned daughter, was restoring the land. It was the work that healed the space between us, not words. Working side by side, sharing the physical struggle of turning broken ground into fruitful earth, was an act of silent, shared commitment. The farm was slowly starting to breathe again, and with it, a tiny, fragile bit of our shared history began to heal. 6 months after James returned, the farm was unrecognizable. The weeds were gone, new seedlings were sprouting in straight, healthy rows, and the house was beginning to look like a home again. We were successful. One rainy afternoon, the work stopped early. James was in the outbuilding, and I was in the main house, staring out the window at the land. The quiet forced the conversation. James came into the main room, carrying an old, dust-covered photo album. It was one of our mother's things, something I thought was lost. He hadn't meant to confront me, but the sheer effort of the last 6 months, combined with the silence, brought everything to the surface. He walked up to me, his shoulders slumped, and he held out the album. "I found this cleaning out the back store," he mumbled. "Remember this?" It was a picture of us as children, sitting on our father's lap under the mango tree, all of us laughing. I nodded, the sight of the happy picture stinging my eyes. He didn't look at me. He looked at the photograph. And then, he finally broke the silence that had lasted 5 terrible years. "Mary," he started, his voice thick and rough. "I need to tell you why. Not to excuse it, but why." He confessed that he wasn't just greedy. He was crippled by insecurity. He admitted that he always felt overshadowed by my father's praise for my spirit, and by the pressure to suddenly become the man of the family. He had been borrowing money secretly for a bad business venture even before father died. When the will divided everything equally, James panicked. He felt he was drowning, and rather than ask for help, he chose to steal. I thought if I had all the money, I could fix my mistake and prove I was strong enough, he confessed, tears finally streaming down his face. But the money just went, and the lie became a monster. I hated myself for what I did to you, Mary. Every day. That's why I let the farm die. I was punishing myself. Hearing the words was shocking. James wasn't a monster. He was a deeply flawed, insecure man driven to a terrible crime by fear and pressure. He finally offered the heartfelt, painful apology I never knew I needed. I didn't rush to comfort him. I let him sit in his truth. "You broke us, James, I said softly, the pain still there, but muted. You took everything. But now, you are building it back with your own 2 hands. That is the only apology that matters. In that moment, the deep, festering wound of betrayal finally closed. The official reconciliation wasn't emotional or dramatic, it was a simple action. A few months later, the harvest was spectacular. The fruits of James's hard labor, combined with my careful planning and investment, yielded the best crops the village had seen in years. We sold the produce at the city market, a place I now knew well, and the profits were significant. I called James into the sitting room one evening, where the house was now warm and lit by lamps I had crafted myself. I handed him an envelope. "This is your share of the profits," I said. "It is a fair wage, and a substantial bonus for your dedication." He looked at the money, humbled. "And this," I continued, sliding a small, laminated paper across the table. "This is the deed to the outbuilding and the small sacred grove of trees you overlooked. I have officially transferred the ownership into your name. It's yours, James. It's security. It's your start." He looked at me, completely overwhelmed. "Mary, I don't understand." "Why?" "Because you earned it," I replied, standing tall. "Because the greatest triumph is not taking back what was stolen, but proving that you can rise above the betrayal. I am no longer defined by what you took from me. I am defined by what I built here, and by the courage it took to forgive you." James didn't try to thank me with words. He simply got up and walked out, heading toward his small, newly owned plot of land. I watched him go, knowing he finally had the security and dignity he'd always craved, given to him not by theft, but by grace. Mary, the girl who fled with nothing, had returned, conquered the injustice, and brought peace to her family's land and to her own heart. She had become the heroine her village never expected. The story of how a girl named Mary ran away in the dead of night with nothing but a desperate hope, and how she returned to claim not just her inheritance but her true self. Today, the farm is thriving. I haven't gone back to the city permanently, though I visit Michael often. I found a new kind of purpose here. The land, once ruined by James's greed, is now a symbol of renewal, of my father's memory being honored every single day. And what about James? He's still here. He's now the most dedicated worker on the farm, responsible and dependable. We aren't brothers and sister like we were when we were children. The innocence is gone. But we have something deeper now. Mutual respect born from shared work and a painful, hard-won reconciliation. We are a family unit again, defined not by blood and betrayal, but by forgiveness and effort. People ask me why I didn't just take the victory and leave James to his ruin. And the answer is the most important lesson I learned: revenge is a trap. It keeps you tied to the person who hurt you. My ultimate triumph wasn't standing over James in court, it was realizing that my strength, the Iroko spirit my father talked about, was best used to build, not to destroy. This story of pain, suspense, survival, and triumph isn't just about an African tale, it's about life. If you're facing betrayal, remember you are not defined by the pain someone inflicts on you. You are defined by how you rise. If you're starting over, remember the kindness of strangers like Grace and Michael. They are lifelines. Be open to them, and when you can, be one yourself. And if you are ever standing in a position of strength over someone who hurt you, choose forgiveness not for them, but for your own peace. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it gives you courage wherever you are on your own journey. Please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. And tell me in the comments below, what is the biggest lesson you learned from Mary's journey?